Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to The Plant Path. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing my number one method for learning medicinal plants, and that is the clinical herbal monograph. So when we think about how do we learn herbal medicine, for the most part, it's by books for a lot of people, right? We learn about herbs by studying the traditions that have been working with them for a very long time, learning from people that have done the same. And in an ideal situation, you should also be learning, those herbs through your experience. You should be tasting those herbs. You should be growing those herbs. You should be out in the fields and the forests and the mountains, observing them in nature, touching them, smelling them, tasting them, harvesting them, preparing them, taking them into your body to experience it. I always say the only way to really learn an herb is to balance the intellectual studying of it with an experiential understanding of it, that you don't want to just accumulate intellectual knowledge about plants. You want to have a tactile, experiential understanding of the plants. And that way you're not just memorizing about them, but you're learning them by heart. But when it comes to the intellectual study of them, I think it's very important to approach that process very strategically. And the way through which, at least in Western herbalism, we typically study medicinal plants is through the monograph, right? The monograph being a focused, small, basically a chapter. Not really a chapter. In some books there's a whole chapter. Most books it's maybe a page or two. In my opinion, the less ideal herb books, a monograph might be a third or a half a page or a quarter of a page. And those ones are usually, I don't personally find that useful more often than not. But there's different types of monographs. And we want to be able to differentiate, first of all, the different types of monographs there are from the one that we would want to be working with as a clinical herbalist. So you have monographs that are more botany-based or plant ID-based. Obviously, those are going to be the monographs that you'll find in, bioregional plant ID books and things of that nature. Some of them will be more chemical, scientific analysis of the herbs, maybe listing out their constituents, their biochemical mechanisms of action, or their pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics. Some monographs might be more safety-based, of just, hey, here's all the contraindications, the drug interactions. Some might be more folklore, history, historical uses, the ways different cultures have used them, etc. More of a ethnobotany type information. And then you have more of your clinical monograph. And to me, as a practicing herbalist, the most important monograph is the clinical monograph. And what I would like to do here in this video is go through some of the main key features of the optimal clinical monograph. But before I do that, I want to make sure that you know about our free workshop that is happening right now, okay? We just released the second workshop yesterday. We're releasing the third and final workshop tomorrow, Friday, and that is the Herbal Monograph Map. So there's a link in the description below. Click that link, head on over, enter your name and email to sign up to join this workshop for free. And that is going to take some of what I'm teaching you here in this post to way deeper levels. But I kind of wanted to give you a little sneak peek taste about the clinical herbal monograph. So if you like what you hear today in this post, make sure you join me in the Herbal Monograph Map. This is only going to be happening for another week. So be sure to join now. Right before the weekend, you can binge the whole thing over the weekend. The entire 3-part workshop series will be open and available by tomorrow, Friday. So be sure to join me there. And with that, let's go into some of the key features of the clinical monograph. Now, this is what I see as, this is like the essentials. These are the main things that you need to make sure are present on a monograph, I think, when you're studying, or even better, when you're compiling information, when you're, say, really interested in learning everything there is to know about plantain, and you've got all of your books out. These are the things that I think are important to focus on. And ultimately, I think these are the things that you should be compiling and putting together and organizing and building out your own monograph library in a way that works for you. So key features, you need to have species-specific Latin names. I am a stickler about this. You only really know what plant you're talking about if you got the Latin name. There's lots of different common names out there. Some are overlapping with other common names, but refer to a bunch of different plants. Some might refer, there's one common name, but it's used for multiple different species under that genus. It's just not clear. It's not much clarity when we're thinking about common names. So it's good to know the common name, better to know the Latin name. From there, you really need to know your fundamental medicinal properties of the herb. This is what I refer to as the 5 keys for understanding plants holistically. I'm not going to go into that here, but you need to have those 5 keys listed out very clearly so you have a foundational understanding of the properties of the herb, okay? So go join the Herbal Monograph Map for much more detail on that. I break that section down in a whole video, so be sure to check that out. The next section would be clinical patterns and uses. This is usually what I think of as the good for section, but I don't like to think of it as the good for section because you got to get into more detail when you're thinking about how to use a medicinal plant. Knowing that an herb is good for a headache is useful, kind of. What's much more useful is to know that it is a relaxant, nervine, spasmolytic that's cooling and specific for occipital headaches. Like, that's way more useful. Now you've got a clinical pattern to look for in a person to match the remedy to the plant, or to match the remedy to the person, right? So think in terms of clinical patterns. Again, whole workshop on this topic alone in the Herbal Monograph Map. Be sure to check that out. But you got to have a clinical pattern section. This is where you're taking all of your fundamental medicinal properties of the herb and weaving them together into, here's the stuff you got to look for in the people. So you have the herb on its own in part 1. Then you have, here's what to look for in the people that will be an effective way to utilize that herb in part 2. Part 3 is multiple areas of study for an herb that are very essential for a clinical monograph, right? You need to know your safety information. Is this herb contraindicated in pregnancy and lactation? Is this herb does this herb have major humoral contraindications? Do you need to really make sure to avoid it with pitta constitutions or people with too much heat? Do you need to avoid it in people with too much damp accumulation or phlegm or cold? Do you need to make sure that someone is not taking an SSRI when you administer this herb? Does it have drug interactions? Very, very important information to have in your clinical monograph, especially in this modern world where most people are on some kind of medication. It's not uncommon for people to be on 1, 2, 5 medications even. So you got to know how to work around that. You got to know your safety information, contraindications. I think a clinical monograph should also have some of your pharmacy information on it. So what is the most optimal way to extract and prepare this herb as a medicine? Does it need to be administered as an infusion? Does it need to be administered as a decoction? Does it tincture well? If it does, what percentage alcohol should you tincture it in? At what strength ratio? Included here, typically for me, would be dosage as well. So, is this a low dose herb? Is it wild indigo and should not exceed 10 drops per dose? Or is it lemon balm and you could give 5 mils to an adult just fine? And most people are not going to have any type of problem with that high of a dose. So it's good to have a general sense of your dosage range for the herb, how much you should use in your water extract, that being infusion or decoction, how much of the tincture should you take, percentage alcohol and ratio. I think having some of that basic pharmacy information is useful because you got to think as a clinician, you're thinking, okay, I'm considering using this herb for this person. Okay, I'm trying to give them this in a tincture form. And then you look at your pharmacy info and it's like, oh, this herb can't be made into a tincture. Maybe you want to give them slippery elm. And you're like, oh, right. Can't really make slippery elm tincture. Okay, maybe we need to make sure we give this herb in capsule or as a powder, or find something else that we can put into the tincture that'll fulfill a similar purpose. Okay. So extraction, pharmacy, dosage, important area of the monograph, very clinically relevant. And it's good to have that information available kind of at a quick glance, in my opinion. That, as clinicians, you're busy, so it should be convenient to find that information. And I think having some formulation methods, formulation strategies included in a monograph is very useful. This can be simple pairings with that herb. That can be based on tradition. That can be based on your formulation preferences. That can be based on what's, your teachers have done. But I think having some lists of simple pairs, triplets, even full formulas that address some of the main clinical patterns that you would consider for this herb is very useful. If anything, just to trigger your thinking, right? Of like, okay, I'm considering using Pipsissewa to address a urinary tract infection. Okay, wait, what are my other urinary antiseptics, right? And then, oh, right, my berberine herbs can be considered. Oh, yarrow's a good one. Right, juniper, uva ursi, madrone, manzanita, right? Just a way of kickstarting. Oh, this herb can be a little harsh for the urinary tract. Maybe we want to combine it with a urinary demulcent. What are the, we might pair it with corn silk or couch grass or marshmallow, something to kind of soften it up a little bit. So thinking through your pairs, how you might pair or triplet that herb, either to exemplify certain properties or to balance out other properties, to make it more acceptable to a wider range of constitutions, what other types of actions would synergize well with that herb, etc. So I like to have that section. It's not necessary, but I think it's super useful. This is how I've been building my monographs for a very long time, and just adding some simple lists of herbs that I would consider pairing with that other herb, just to get the gears turning. We can't be expected to have everything memorized all the time, so it's useful to have some of those lists to just get your brain working. So those are the main key features that I think a good clinically relevant monograph should have. Now, again, as a practitioner, you're busy, hopefully. Well, there's a balance. It's nice to be busy because that means you've got clients, which means you're able to make a living. So you don't want to be too bored as a practitioner, but you also don't want to be too slammed busy and stressed out about it. But it's not uncommon if you get busy, you don't have time to sit and read chapters and chapters and chapters and pull out all of your different herb books that you have, compile it into a clinically relevant monograph that gets you as much depth as possible to get all the details you need to determine if it's a right remedy for your patient. No more, no less. So there's a balance with that, where you want to have all the info that you need, but you don't want it too long and too difficult and time consuming to sort through to determine if it's the right remedy for you. Now, what I noticed about a lot of monographs is that they contain a lot of information that isn't always necessary or clinically relevant, right? And now I just want to be clear. I'm not saying it's not interesting information. I'm not saying it's not useful information. I'm not saying it's not good information to know about the herb, okay? I'm just saying it may not necessarily be super clinically relevant if you're trying to have basically a quick reference type tool to just quickly look up an herb, double check what's up with it. Oh wait, is that hot or cold? Wait, how's that herb taste? Or what's the dosage range, right? Quick reference. So you don't want it bogged down. Big one here would be constituent listings. I personally don't think constituent listings are that necessarily clinically relevant. Useful, but in another way. Like, I think the chemistry is useful to determine how to optimally extract the herb. And that's why if I'm doing monographs that's including this information, it's usually around the pharmacy info, because I think that's what's most important. The constituents don't necessarily make you a better practitioner. It makes you a better herbal pharmacist, right? Constituent listings, I don't think necessarily have to be there. Botany, some books have these really long descriptions of the herb, botanical descriptions, identification characteristics, morphology characteristics. I don't think that's necessary. That's very important, obviously, for a botany book, for a plant ID book, for if you're out in the bush and trying to ID a plant, obviously that's super relevant information, but in a clinical context, not relevant. I would also add there with the chemistry part, you have pharmacological mechanisms of action. So that might be the pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics of the herb. Not a lot of monographs contain this information because, to be perfectly honest, not a lot is known about that with herbs. Some specific constituents that's known a little bit. This can really bog down a monograph. I don't think it's that necessary clinically, unless it really pertains to contraindications and safety. When you have herbs, for example, that affect the cytochrome P450 detoxification pathways in the liver, that's going to affect metabolism of certain drugs. That's good to know, right? That's good to know that an herb has that kind of a pathway and does that. St. John's wort's a really good example of that. So keep that in mind, but you don't want to have too much of that information there as well. Now, while referencing monographs in your library is an excellent way to learn your medicinal plants, but I think an even better way is to create your own monographs yourself. After all, reading only goes so far. Writing something down takes it to a whole other level, right? They say you really know something when you can teach it, or when you've just taken the time to think it through. And when you're just reading about plants, it's more passive, right? You're sitting there and you're reading the thing, you close the book, you walk away. Very easy to forget everything that you read, because most of the time people tend to be reading in a passive manner. For myself, what I realized when it came to studying plants, or really when it comes to studying anything, I retain the information significantly better when I start writing about it, when I am actively reading, okay? So not just passively reading in one ear, out the other, but when I'm actively reading because I'm hunting for patterns. I've got this book and that book and that book, and I'm saying, okay, what are the similarities? What's the crossover? Where's their difference? Where is this book saying something a little different from that book, a little different from that book? And how do I kind of resolve those, especially if there's conflicting information, which sometimes there is. I really encourage the construction of your own monographs. For one, because it helps you retain the information when you're studying the herbs. It helps you just dig deep into one herb, get all of your books out, open them all up to that herb, that monograph. You're looking at it through the lens of Chinese medicine and the lens of Ayurveda and the lens of traditional Western herbalism and the lens of modern science and the lens of this instructor and that teacher and that author. And you get, the goal is to get a well-rounded understanding of that herb, but then to consolidate all of that down, right? To bring all that information together in a cohesive way, in a comprehensive monograph, and then especially that's organized in a way that makes sense to you. This was huge for me. I'm an organizational freak. I really like things to be hyper organized in its place. My mind functions in a very particular way. And oftentimes when I'm looking at the way other people organize things, it doesn't work with the way I would organize it. And so I like to rearrange things in a way that makes sense to my own brain. And I think I don't think I'm alone in that. I think this makes sense because our minds all work in slightly different manners. There's certain ways things are structured and presented and that make sense to people in different ways. And so I really encourage you to build your own herbal monographs and structure and organize them in a way that makes sense to you. Now, what's really cool about this is that as you build these monographs, you can organize not just the individual monographs, but your collection of monographs in a multitude of ways to turn it into a cross-referencing database. What's so cool about, say, PDF documents is that they're searchable. And so also what's really cool about computers is that you can have one file and create shortcuts to it and have folder structures that are organized in ways so you can quickly and easily find what you're looking for to save time. And so cross-referencing databases is a way that I really like to do it. This is how I personally organize my information when I'm needing to look things up. So like a simple example of this would be on your computer, and I encourage people to type your monographs. Handwritten in notebooks is useful, but I think digital documents are nice because you have a little bit more flexibility with it in a lot of ways. So you could say, for example, create a folder for each organ system of the body. And within that organ system, you could either have subfolders that are the herbal actions associated with that organ system. And within that herbal action associated with that organ system, you can have your list of all your monographs and herbs that correspond to that category. And so you could say open liver, and you could have your bitter tonics. You could have your choleretics and cholagogues. You could have your hepatoprotectives, right? And then you could have all of your herbs organized so that you know exactly where to find what you're looking for. So that's a very simple way you could do it. You can even do this, especially if you do like digital documents. For example, in a Google Drive or something, you could create a Google document that has all those categories and listings that then links to your monograph. So you could have, okay, liver category, and then hepatoprotectives, and then your list of all of your monographs that are in that category with links to those monographs. So under the hepatoprotectives, right, you could say, okay, here's my milk thistle, here's my reishi, here's my turmeric, here's my dandelion, right? And that just links right to those monographs. So then you have basically a reference tool that guides you to the herbs so that you can get your information quick and easy. And I think that's a key thing for, especially when you become a busy herbalist, the more time you can save is very, very useful. So this is my number one method for learning medicinal herbs, to create my own clinical herbal monographs. And this is what I encourage all of you to do. This provides a really good starting point for what I think you should include in those monographs, what you might consider excluding from those monographs. Now, of course, this is a very high-level overview. As I said earlier, there's a whole bunch more detail that can be gone into on this, and that is exactly what I have available for you over at the Herbal Monograph Map. So again, free workshop series happening right now. And only for about another week. So in order to get the ultimate guide for how to create your own holistic, clinically relevant monographs, click the link in the description below, enter your name and email, sign up for the Herbal Monograph Map, 3-part workshop series, in-depth, comprehensive. Really, this is not just a guide for how to create monographs, but really what it is a strategic framework for how to effectively learn herbal medicine quickly, efficiently, and effectively. This is not, this is really, if you follow what I share with you in this workshop series, it's gonna help you learn your herbs way faster. I believe I've created a very useful system for how to study plants, for how to consolidate information, for how to write about it, for how to think about it, for how to organize it, so that you can get to the right herb for the right person effectively and efficiently. So get started today. Click the link in the description below, enter your name and email effectively and efficiently. I look forward to seeing you in there. And thank you very much for joining me in this episode of The Plant Path. I do truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be with me and to further your plant path. And I hope this content serves you well. Feel free to drop a comment below if you're on YouTube. Leave a great review on the podcast if you're a podcast listener. There's not very many reviews on the podcast. So for any of you listening on the podcast, if you don't mind taking a minute or two to leave a good 5-star review, and that helps other people discover the Plant Path podcast. And of course, if you're anywhere other than the website, be sure to head over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, enter your name and email so you get all of the updates of everything that's going on, when we're enrolling in courses, when we've got more in-depth free workshops for you. You'll, of course, get all of our weekly updates and content from the Plant Path so that we can hopefully serve you well on your journey to being an excellent herbalist. So thank you very much for joining me. I do truly appreciate it. And until the next one, take care and be well.